Hey everybody, it's Mike and welcome to Chip Damage. And I am filming this a short 2 days after the Street Fighter V Summer 2021 update. And I've had some time to kind of think about it because if you don't know, that was a very, can I say, polarizing event. And, I think I've made it well known throughout my prior videos that I'm a huge fighting game fan. I'm in particular a huge Street Fighter fan, and Capcom has been one of my favorite developers of video games since I was very, very young. And Street Fighter V, the latest Street Fighter game, has been with us for over 5 years now. Yes, can you believe this came out, I believe, February 8th, 2016, I believe was the release date. That was well over 5.5 years ago. And it's been a wild ride up and down. And so with this video, what I want to do is talk about what I thought about that update, because there's a lot of varying opinions on it, and kind of the general course that Street Fighter V has taken over the last 5 years now that the end of its development, the end of its DLC kind of roadmap is finally upon us, because it has been a strange time to be a Street Fighter fan. So if you like what you're about to see, please comment below and let me know what you think about Street Fighter V, what you want to see next, what you thought of that update, and please consider subscribing. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. The Summer 2021 update. Well, if you don't know, what it was a about 70-80 minute presentation where guys over at Capcom USA and Japan kind of presented the final 3 Street Fighter V characters, along with other updates, like minor updates like tournament mode and things like that. And if you haven't seen other videos like Maximilian Dude's like reaction to it, let me say it was pretty varying, pretty polarizing. So let's get the good out of the way, right out of the way. They showed gameplay of Street Fighter V's upcoming characters that are both being released on August 16th. Oro from Street Fighter 3, a 110-year-old hermit. Very cool looking character with some like sage abilities, fights with like a turtle in one hand, some very unique telekinetic powers. And the most exciting character of this season, at least in my opinion, Akira from Rival Schools, which doesn't get nearly enough love from Capcom. Like, there are a lot of Rival Schools references in other Capcom games, but very rarely does a character come out and actually fight. I think the last time we got it was like Batsu and Tatsunoko versus Capcom, one of my favorite games. But yeah, both of them look stellar. And the big surprise for them is that they are both coming out together in 2 weeks, rather than simply releasing them like separately, like is the norm, like Oro now and like Akira later. No, we get them in 2 weeks from now, which is pretty cool. But then the third character was announced, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But can we just talk about like the general presentation? Well, let's talk about Capcom's prior presentations on Street Fighter V, particularly Season 5. With Season 5, the creative team of Street Fighter V somewhat changed. The prior director, Yoshinori Ono, the producer, I should say, left Capcom, and you could tell there was kind of a shift behind the scenes in the Capcom fighting game department, particularly with Street Fighter V. So the prior presentations were kind of done by the new producer directors of Street Fighter V, and it was very down home, very grassroots in a way. It was literally the two gentlemen speaking directly to the camera and just saying, hey, here's the new character. This is what we're doing. These are their abilities. Please, thank you for playing. And there'd always be like some Capcom League promo that no one really cared about. And it was very honest, because I think Capcom realized that they kind of flubbed with Street Fighter V, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but they wanted to kind of go out on a better note. So they're like, let's try a new presentation. Let's try to turn down the glitz and the glam and the hype and just give people what they want. The updates, honestly, from the people who make the game, and the reason why they're there and how they're going to play. And I think that was a fantastic method. I think that really hyped people up in this last year for Street Fighter V. Like when Season 5 was even announced, which was kind of uncertain to begin with, I think people were generally happy. Like, we knew we were getting Dan and Rose and Oro, which were old favorites from varying parts of the Street Fighter universe, and Akira being a guest character was fantastic. But with this newest update, they had 2 commentators who, don't get me wrong, they seemed fantastic. They seemed very good at their jobs of commentating. However, that's not... what fans wanted. I think it came off as incredibly ingenuine, their levels of excitement over these most minor things. Like there was an announcement of Guile and Cammy skins coming to Fortnite, and they just flipped out over it, and they overanalyzed and over talked about it, and it really stretched it out. Like this whole presentation could have been 15 to 30 minutes, but it was stretched out so much because Capcom, I felt like the twitchness of this. Like I felt handshake deals, like corporate fakeness being injected into this presentation, just stretching it out and making it incredibly painful to watch. Like, yes, watching Oro and Akira's gameplay was wonderful, but like, did they really need to talk about it right after it was shown to us? Like in the presentation, like it was injected, and it felt very tone deaf. Like, like the esports section of Street Fighter V is very important to them, but like that's not exactly who's tuning in. It was a wide, broad audience tuning in. Like I love Street Fighter. I'm a decent player, but I'm not competitive. I could not care less about the esports aspect, like these hype men talking about it. I want to hear the people who make it talking about it, and that's it, and then move on. So yeah, there was just like a very corporate feel to this with like these Twitch Fight FGC commentators who are very great and talented at what they do. Don't get me wrong, those guys can talk. Like I think I can talk at length. These guys are masters, and they can keep people interested. But this wasn't exactly the time or place, and I feel like that was the general feel of the internet. If you disagree, please let me know. If you think they actually enhanced the presentation, good on you, and let me know in the comments below. But I really felt like that made the whole thing feel phony. But moving on to the kind of the piece that everyone's talking about. Like it could have just been a decent presentation that was overly long, but no, they ended on the revelation of the 5th character of the Street Fighter V 5th season, the 45th character overall, and the final character overall for Street Fighter V. And that was the boxer, Muay Thai fighter, kickboxer, UFC fighter, whatever he is, Luke. Yeah, Capcom legend Luke. Now, let's get something straight very quickly. And I see this as a sentiment amongst many fighting game commentators out there, many people who watched the trailer and kind of spoke about it. My own personal circle of friends who are all into fighting games also said this. The character's fighting style actually looks pretty cool. There are plenty of boxers, and there's been MMA fighters in Street Fighter 4, like Abel in Street Fighter 4, but this guy looks a little different. He has like stars on his arms that like juke up, like that like power up, and he releases like projectiles through his punches, and he's got like a shoryuken, and his animation is actually pretty impressive. He looks like work was done to him. Like it is a different fighting style. Like he's not a Shoto, that's for sure. It's hard to tell what he is. Like he has projectiles, but he looks like he's good up close, and that's fantastic. Like variety in gameplay is important. But one thing that many people forget, or some people don't believe, is that fighting game characters are more than a pile of mechanics. They are not. The reason why people, at least that I know, play fighting games and pick a certain character and stick with them is not just because, oh, they are the best, they're the top tier, blah, blah, blah. Maybe in competitive leagues, that's the reason that it's done. But to the vast majority of players, it is a firm balance between style, like the character themselves, and the gameplay. Like I don't know exactly what that ratio is. Is it 50-50, 70-30? I don't know. But at least for myself, it can't just be, oh man, this character plays great. I don't care what they look like or their background or their style. No. I need to be this character. Like, no. It has to be, hey, they look cool. They have a cool look to them, movement to them, whatever. And then it turns out that like they play well. I think it's like there's a golden ratio. What do you think? This is like a hotly debated topic. Like, I know there were some very controversial statements when Marvel Infinite had like a reduced roster about like mechanics versus characters. Like, I think it's a golden ratio. You can have a bunch of amazing looking characters, but they can't all play the same. Or you could have a bunch of bland characters that all play wildly different. Like neither would work. It has to be like this golden ratio. I don't know what it is, but Luke's look is just not great is what I'm getting at. Like he is a, blonde boxer. And, I'm getting kind of sick of people saying that there's too many blondes in Street Fighter V, not just because I happen to be like a white blonde guy, but it's like, whatever, like, there's costumes and colors that change it. So if it bothers you, change it. Like, I don't know if it's like the issue of representation, but like, yeah, okay. So like there's a lot of blonde characters, like whatever, just change their costume or their armor or whatever. Like that doesn't bother me. But like it comes down to like just who he is. Like he looks like a mix between Ed and like Sean maybe from Street Fighter 3, or like I don't know, like he looks not impressive. Like, I can't just look at him and say that's a Street Fighter character. Like, it's not that he's a blonde guy, that he's a blonde guy who looks like a different costume of Ed. Like, we already have a white blonde boxer. And sure, he looks like he plays wildly different, but from like an aesthetic, like, what is he? Is he the MMA guy? That's what Abel was, given that Abel isn't in this game, but like, is he the kickboxer, the Muay Thai guy? He looks like maybe Ed mixed with like Adon. Like, he looks like he's just a creative character from multiple other Street Fighter characters put together, and that really hurts the image. I think people were very disappointed with his general look. Like, I don't think he looks cool. Like, I think he looks okay just because his moveset looks cool. But I think like the biggest problem with it is the same problem that Ultra Street Fighter 4 had and that the first season of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate had. It's the placement of the character in the release. Like, okay, so they announced the first 4 characters of this season automatically. It was like, Dan, Rose, Oro, Akira, and then a mystery 5th character. You don't end it on a new character. Like, when you do that, when you have 3 pretty famous beloved characters and then a pseudo guest character, Akira, I'll say she's a guest character given that she's never appeared in a Street Fighter. Yeah, it's Capcom, but it's still like, you would consider Heihachi a guest character in Soul Calibur even though they're made by the same company. Like, that's still a guest. Like, they're out of their element. Like, you would think, oh man, this character is going to be even bigger than Akira, bigger. Like, and maybe this is just naivete or foolishness on my part or on most of the gaming community's part, but like, you would expect that after such a cool lineup that, like, man, Akira, throwback to rival schools, the next thing's going to be even bigger and better. Who could it be? Like, we all thought it was going to be a guest character, right? I've seen videos that said it was going to be an SNK character, given that SNK and Capcom recently released SNK vs. Capcom, the Neo Geo game on the Switch, that they were working together again. There were rumblings. Of course, there have been many crossovers in Tekken 7 where there were Capcom and SNK characters. There was crossovers in Super Smash Brothers. It's crossovers in Samurai Shodown. Like, crossovers are kind of the thing to do in fighting games in general, but Street Fighter 5 hasn't really done that. Street Fighter is not typically a game that has guest characters, but like, we thought it'd be, something along those lines. Me, myself, what was my dream? Well, if my shirt didn't give it away, I was hoping for my boy Terry Bogard. I know Terry was in Smash, but come on, like, if you're going to have an SNK character, it's either going to be Kyo or Terry, and out of those two, I'd like it to be Terry. Just like goodwill. I love that. Like, there's a handshake deal behind the scenes between SNK and Capcom and says, hey, take our main guy and put him in your game and add your mechanics to him. I thought that would have been cool. I think that would have been a shock. Like, oh man, they're back together. And then that leads into the hopeful release of Capcom vs. SNK 2 online. Please let that be real, or God forbid it, Capcom vs. SNK 3. But no, that wasn't what happened. And on the note of guest characters, I guess Capcom avoids guest characters in Street Fighter V. Like, there is one plus to that. It makes the game easier to release in the future. Like, Link and Soul Calibur 2 will probably never be re-released again. Like, there's problems with that. Like, Super Smash Brothers probably never be able to be re-released in the future easily. Or Tekken 7. Like, there's deals, like, because like Negan's in Tekken 7, I'm sure that's going to be difficult to re-release. Like, those guests have to be removed. Or, like Soul Calibur 4 with the Star Wars characters, that ain't probably ever happening again. Like, ever getting re-released. Like, Capcom owns all these characters, so they can be released again and again and again in the future without issue. So I get it there, but I mean, the way they built this 5th character up, we waited a year for this 5th character. If they were to switch up the order a little bit, right? If they were to announce like Luke, like, all right, you have these 3 classics, you have like, Dan, Rose, Oro coming back, new character Luke, and a mystery 5th character, and that 5th character ended up being Akira from rival schools, I think it would have been a much better situation. Given I don't think people would have been as hyped for Season 5 initially, at this time in, August 2021, everyone would have definitely been hyped. Like, oh man, rival schools. Like, that feeling was there when this season was first announced. Akira made it hype because they're like, yo, they're branching out. They're doing some weird stuff. But no, like, Luke, even though his moveset seems cool, just seems like a bargain Street Fighter character. Like, oh, he's the bridge to Street Fighter's future. He might be in Street Fighter 6. So I bet a lot of characters in Street Fighter 5 are going to make it to Street Fighter 6. I think they, like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, will he be the Alex of the next game? Will he be like the main character? It doesn't matter. Like, no one actually cares about that. Like, either give us Street Fighter 6, or why do we need this bridge? Like, so yeah, I think his placement as the last character, who's the only unannounced character, he's the big secret that we've all been building up for like near a year. I think that's what hurt him. Not the character himself. Yeah, he's bland looking to an extent. He's not the most appealing character. Not because he's a blonde guy. Like, that's not why. But just like everything else. Like, yeah, okay, he's got like the trunks. I'm like, it was just very disappointing. Really let the air out of the sails. But overall, I think it was a good season. But like that, think about it. No one's even excited that like Akira and Oro launched like in 2 weeks together. Like no one's talking about like, oh man, two characters in 2 weeks. Like no, everyone's like, man, wasn't Luke a letdown? And if I'm wrong, like if I'm stepping out, if on your toes here, if you guys think he's awesome, please let me know in the comments below. And I'm gonna try him. I try everybody. Maybe he's got an amazing story, and he plays fantastically. But like that wasn't immediately evident. So let me know what you guys think of Luke, and because I really want to know. But let's move on to like this is the end of Street Fighter. Let's talk about that. Like this is the end of Street Fighter V. Like to my knowledge, behind the scenes, Street Fighter V Championship Edition, which was released last year, and ended, which was really like Street Fighter Season 4, which ended with Gil and Seth, was really supposed to be the end, which made sense. The end with two boss characters, two new boss characters, particularly like Seth and Gil coming back into the Street Fighter universe. That felt like a finale. But due to possible production troubles behind the scenes with Street Fighter 6 or the kind of continued popularity of Street Fighter 5 or increased popularity, I should say, I've heard a multitude of reasons why they decided to do a season 5, and that's where these characters led into. But overall, these 5 seasons have been wild. If you weren't playing back then, if you're not aware, when this game first released in 2016, this game only had 16 characters. The Street Fighter 5 kind of fumbled right out of the gate. It fumbled hard. I was there. I bought this game at launch. Street Fighter, as many of you know, is a game that is near and dear to my heart. And particularly like with Street Fighter 4, I played that game for years and years. And that game kind of had this similar problem. Like, its last season, which is a bunch of imports from Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which I didn't mind. I thought they were cool. But the 5th character, which was going to be an all-new original character, was DiCaprio, which was just Cammy with like an alternate input method for moves. Terrible, terrible way to end an amazing game. But like that game carried the fighting game genre, revived the fighting game genre for the 7th generation of games, the 360 PS3 era of games. You wouldn't have, well, I wouldn't say necessarily, but it was a big reason why games like Mortal Kombat 9 and Tekken 6, Soul Calibur 4, like they were all kind of brought up by the release of Street Fighter 4. Soul Calibur 4 came out beforehand, but still, like, overall fighting games kind of came back in the limelight because of the popularity and the fantastic gameplay of Street Fighter 4. So 5, releasing 7-8 years later, had a lot on its shoulders. And when it launched, right before it launched, rather, it didn't feel right. Like there was there was a little hesitation. I mean, Capcom had kind of released a dud with Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which wasn't terrible, but which just wasn't the hit that people wanted it to be or that it should have been. And the marketing was a little odd for Street Fighter V. It was coming out very soon after the final release of Street Fighter 4, Ultra Street Fighter 4, as it were. So there wasn't really like a thirst for Street Fighter 5 yet. Like, yeah, people were getting tired of 4, but like it was kind of odd that it was announced so soon afterwards. And then like the visuals weren't a drastic change. I could say pretty firmly that the visuals from Street Fighter 2 to 3 were pretty drastic. Yes, they were both 2D, but like Street Fighter 3 is one of the smoothest, sickest looking 2D fighting games of all time, and it was a big improvement over 2 and even Alpha, which looked amazing. It had more of an anime aesthetic, but 3 was more of like a smooth, like hand-drawn almost like effect, so it was a big upgrade. And obviously Street Fighter 4 went for the 2.5D claymation almost like look, and everyone was big and bulky, and it took me a minute to get used to, but I ended up loving it. 5 is more of just like a direct evolution of that. It looks like an extra coat of paint. Like, I think Maximilian Dude said this best. From 10 feet away, 4 and 5 don't look that different. But whatever, it'll play great, right? Well, when it came out, it played fine. However, the problem was you went from a roster of 44 characters in Ultra Street Fighter 4 to 16 in Street Fighter 5. And I know that like some games can get away with a smaller roster like that, but this is Street Fighter. You have monumental history that you can pull characters from. And 16 characters that also had no arcade mode. Unbelievable. Like, no fighting game ever had ever released without an arcade mode, to my knowledge. Like, bare bones features, an ugly interface, and just like sluggish online at launch. There was nothing to do in the game. Now, like when Street Fighter 4 came out originally, it had 25 characters, given it was in arcades for a solid year before it came out, but it didn't matter. It had 25 characters at launch, including all of the Street Fighter 2 characters, Cammy Fei Long, and a bunch of new characters, as long as like Sakura and Gen. There was other returners. Like there were characters that people wanted to play as, and there was enough at 25. Given that Street Fighter 5 did not have an arcade launch, maybe it should have. Maybe like that, like because 16, it just felt like you could do everything there was to do in this game within like a weekend. You could play online a few times, but only a few characters were really fun to play as, and you keep seeing the same faces, and there's no single player. Me, myself, I like arcade modes in fighting games. I like single player modes. I, in fact, go through the arcade mode with almost every character to see if I like playing as them, if I like their story. And like there was just none of that in Street Fighter 5. There was like 2-match fights for like an individual story for each character, and it was one round and incredibly easy. Didn't give you there was no soul to it. It felt like a wire work game made exclusively for like tournaments, and it felt bare bones. And that first season of content that added a not great story mode, like whatever, like a Shadow Falls, you could beat it in a few hours, get some fight money out of it. It was whatever. But that first season was the characters were like Alex, Balrog, Guile, Ibuki, Juri, and Urien. Like, okay, first off, you should never have Guile and Balrog as DLC. They should be in the base game. No one should be giving money for those characters. They've been around since like 91. Put them in the base game. Like, that wasn't a great season. That got us to 22 characters. And that's what the game should have launched at. If it launched with those 6 characters, if you had a roster of 22 and an arcade mode, it wouldn't have been such a disastrous launch. But like that just felt like they rushed the game out, which I've heard that they did like 6 months or 8 months too early. And then it didn't get much better until, with Season 2. Season 2 started with Akuma, who yet again should have been in the game. You shouldn't like be paying money for Akuma like necessarily. Like he's like, I guess I could see like Oni because he's like Super Akuma, but like he felt like he should have been there already. And then they had 5 new characters, but Capcom was smart. Even though they didn't reveal the new characters, they said they would be new characters. I think though, like that was not a bad way to do a second season. You bring back a fan favorite with Akuma, and then you say 5 new characters, brand new, never seen before. So people know what they're getting before they buy that season. If you buy it early, you're like, all right, I'm not going to know who they are, but hey, it's going to add some variety. And the characters were like Abigail, Ed, Colin, Minot, and Zeku. Some of those were great. I mean, a lot of people hate Abigail because like he's hideous, but like Minot isn't bad, and they tried. And some of those like designs are all over the place. Like Zeku's not bad, kind of a tie-in to Strider. But at least you knew what you were getting within that season. And then in 2018, you finally started getting what you wanted. They added an arcade mode. And by doing the multiple arcade modes, you can unlock some really cool artwork in the game. Fantastic. Really should have been there at launch. If they had launched with that, if they had launched with the first 2 seasons of characters and the arcade mode, you would have had a solid 28 characters and an arcade mode. That should have been definitely the standard. Like, this is Street Fighter. All other fighting games are trying to emulate Street Fighter, or did try to emulate it in the past. From your Mortal Kombat to your Killer Instinct, everything owes its like genesis in the fighting game genre to this day to the first Street Fighter games. Like, you need to go big. Like, yes, Guilty Gear Strive, which is a great game that just recently released, came out with 15 characters recently. However, that game has 15 entirely unique characters, a great amount of unlockables with like music and stuff. A decent visual upgrade over the prior game, Guilty Gear Xrd. Not like a monumental upgrade like most people would say. Like, I think it's a pretty decent upgrade. And the 2 new characters, Nago, and I believe, I forget the wolf girl's name off the top of my head at the moment, look fantastic. Like, that's like Guilty Gear is never been a game that needed a huge roster, or ever had a big roster. I think the largest roster Guilty Gear ever had was like 25 or 28. So launching with 15, kind of understandable, because you're going to get like wild, varied characters. Street Fighter, you're the OG. You need to launch with a big game. So 28 and that arcade mode and story, that would have been fine. And then yet again, I think they knew that, because Season 3, this is where I really started to get into Street Fighter. Season 3 it all started with that amazing trailer that announced the entire season of characters. It was Sakura, Blanca, Cody, the new character G, new character Falk, and Sagat. First off, Sagat should have been in the base game to begin with, probably Blanca too. But hey, they had new looks that were fantastic. Sakura's new costume was incredible. Like, hey, this is the old, and Cody coming back as the mayor of Metro City. This guy is my main now, just because Metro City is basically the Street Fighter World version of New Jersey, if you didn't know, and that's where I grew up. I just wanted, like, and Falk, okay, Falk sucks, but, I'm sure there's some fans of Falk out there, but like that season felt great. It had the arcade mode, it had these classic characters, the roster was getting bigger, and they told you all the characters early. And then they released G and Sagat together. Mwah, fantastic. Thought Street Fighter had some really good momentum right around then. That was right around the summer of 2018 or the year of 2018. And then season 4, which got announced, they announced Kage, like Evil Ryu, and then in January, and then nothing for like 6 or 7 months. Like, what? Like, all this momentum came to a dead stop. And then we kind of figured out why, because I believe at EVO or at E3, they announced 3 characters at once. It was Lucia from Final Fight 3, Poison from Final Fight, and E Honda. All at once. Like, they were going to wow us by releasing 3 characters at once. But the thing was, like, you had to wait 6 months for those characters. So, like, people started to lose interest in the game. Like, why? Like, it would have been better if they just did it, like, a month and a half, 2 months apart, like they did with the prior seasons. Like, waiting 3 months or like 7 months for those characters to all be released at once, it didn't feel special. Like, first off, yet again, Honda probably should have been in the base game. But Lucia's cool. Any Final Fight love, I love. Final Fight is my favorite beat 'em up of all time, that whole series. But yet again, like, the momentum was just in a weird spot. And then, they released Seth and Gil months later, near the end of the year, and I believe going into 2020. And it was just like long stretches of time before we knew what was going on. Like, season 4 really killed the momentum, but it felt like the end. Like, and at that point they had 40 characters, so it could have gotten away with it. Like, if they ended there, it would have been like, all right, that was a solid ending for Street Fighter V. 4 years of a bumpy road, but at the end, a game that is still the centerpiece of Evo. Like, plays pretty well. They added the multiple V triggers and the V skills. Like, they varied it up a lot. And then the miracle of season 5, like, for whatever reason, they said, hey, let's do some more. Like I said, it could have been problems behind the scenes with development of Street Fighter 6 or the rising in popularity of the game because season 3 was so good, but they decided to do it. And and that brings me back to the beginning of the conversation. And here we are today. And man, I wish that I bought this right here, Championship Edition, today. Can you imagine, buying this game today? It's $30 with like 40 characters on, like, right in the game with all the stages, like, and the 2 V triggers, 2 V skills. Like, it would have been amazing, but that's not what the case was. Like, because I was there from the beginning, since most people got Street Fighter V at the beginning and kind of watched this painful evolution, Street Fighter V in many ways feels like, I don't know, like, a car that was like, it's held together by like tape and like pins and hope and faith. Like, the core of the game is fun. The gameplay was great and is very good now, but because what came before, because this painful, boring road that we came from, it never really shook that painful launch, that painful first year or two. And that really sucks, because at the end of the day, this is probably the fighting game I ended up playing the most throughout this generation. Every time a new character came out, I would hop on and play, and it just never felt as special as Street Fighter 4 did during its day. I'm really hoping that's something they can rectify with Street Fighter 6. Yet again, Street Fighter, it just felt greedy at times with what they were asking for with costumes and the over focus on esports and the advertising. It felt so weird. And yeah, it's a great large game today, and I wish I just bought it today. But when you know what it's gone through, it kind of loses the magic. And I don't know what I would change for Street Fighter 6. Some people say a more realistic art style, a more anime art style, but I got to tell you this, whatever it is, I think you got to start with a roster of at least, and I'm big on roster, I talk about this all the time because I love variety. You got to start at least with 25 characters, right? And it's got to mostly be, like returners, like old favorites. A Guilty Gear Strive example. Out of the 15 characters, Giovanna, I just thought of the Guilty Gear Strive's characters' names, I'm sorry. Out of the 15 characters, you had 13 returners and 2 great new characters. I think that's a decent ratio. Same thing with like Soul Calibur 2 back in the day. Like, that had all the characters from the original plus like some great like new characters like Colin and Raphael. I think that's what you got to do. You have to have mostly like the old returners come back, like the favorites, or at least the best of, and then like a few really good new characters. Like, don't give us like Rufus's and like like, I don't know, Nakalis. Give us like really good new characters. I'm sorry if you're fans of those characters. I was not. Um, like, just bring back that main cast. Don't make us pay for Guile. Don't make us pay for Blanca or E Honda. Bring back most of the old cast at the very least with some new ones. And then with the DLC, I would say mix it up. You gotta, like, if you want to bring back some more obscure characters, like if you want Ingrid from Capcom Fighting Evolution as a DLC, that's fine. If you want to bring in some new characters, that's great. But don't keep them a secret. You gotta, like, I really liked how Season 3 just told you who was coming throughout the whole year. And yeah, maybe that reduces the hype week, like release to release, but at least people know what they're buying. And if it's going to be a big secret, you better deliver on that secret. You can't be tone deaf. It needs to be like a guest or a very fan demanded character. It can't be Luke. It can't be DiCaprio. No, no, no. It's got to be someone that's like buried deep in the history of Street Fighter. It's got to be like, I don't know, Shen Long or like something like that. Either like a lore character that's very important or a guest character. Like, but yet again, that core roster, mostly returning faces, some new, and then the DLC, you sprinkle them, but you got to do it in the right way. You can't build up. And, maybe Street Fighter 5 or Street Fighter 6, like maybe one of the ideas that they're toying with right now is bringing in other Capcom franchises. Obviously, Final Fight has been ingrained with Street Fighter since the alpha days. But, now with Rival Schools, how great would it be if they brought in other fighting games within reason? I don't expect them to bring in like all Capcom games. Like, you're not gonna have Dante and Amaterasu in Street Fighter 5. As much as I would love that, save that for Marvel vs. Capcom. But like worlds that kind of fit. Rival Schools clearly fits. I mean, Sakura was in Rival Schools. Final Fight, we almost have everybody. I mean, imagine if Mike Hagar showed up in Street Fighter to fight Zangief. We haven't had that yet. I had a friend who thought the fifth character was gonna be Mike Hagar. That would have been great, just because like that's like not a deep cut, but he's a pretty beloved Capcom character. But bring in Rival Schools, like hell, bring in Strider. I mean, I guess he kind of fit. Why not? Long forgotten fighting game characters. Like, yeah, maybe it wouldn't fit the world perfectly. I mean, you have Oni and you have Evil Ryu, so a lot of things could fit. Bring in a Darkstalker. Their combat system wouldn't need to be changed that much. So hell, why not? Bring in a Red Earth character. I know I'm getting to like crossover territory, but like, why not just get the refugees from other fighting games that you're not supporting, or Capcom IPs that you're not supporting? Get Gene from like God Hand. That would be cool. I'm not saying I need that's what I necessarily think is best, but I really like the idea. Maybe just Rival Schools. Bring in some fresh blood that would be fresh for most people, new and exciting. But for OGs who like the deep cuts like myself, man, would it be cool if like Batsu and Kyo and his whole team could show up, play as Daigo. My boy Shoma with the baseball bat just taking it to Ryu's face. Like, that would be so cool. Maybe do that. Bring in the rest of the Final Fight characters too, like Carlos and Mike Hagar. As far as art style, I'm an anime fan, so I would love if it was like a super, like almost like, Guilty Gear Strive, what they're doing over at Arc System Works is fantastic. I think if they applied something similar to that to Street Fighter, it'd be great. When I think hyper realism, I start to think of the Mortal Kombat 11 style. And while the graphics themselves to me are very impressive, and I don't want to piss off any MK fans, but like, I don't find the actual look of the characters super appealing in a lot of instances. I don't think that coat of paint would look great on the Street Fighter characters. I'd rather go away from realism, more towards like a stylized look, because Street Fighter's a crazy Japanese world, so I think like anime fits it very well. But I think we're kind of done with like the claymation kind of look with 4 and 5. Like, I think we need to kind of move away from that. But hey, whatever it is, I'm going to pick it up because I love Street Fighter. I want to support it. I think that they really did at the end turn it around. And that's my last point I kind of want to make here is, yes, despite like, all the troubles of Street Fighter 5. At the end of the day, this is an excellent fighting game now. It wasn't when it began, but 45 characters in with a ton of stages and extras and unlockables and a good arcade mode and a semi-decent story mode, like amount of story mode. This is a great game now. I think Capcom's dedication to this really ended up paying off. Like, it didn't abandon the game when it didn't sell like gangbusters. And I think one of the smartest things they could do that is just make it cross-play and multi-platform from the get-go. Like, it's on everything. Like, hell, maybe even Switch. And just, that would probably really help the market. Like, just it doesn't need to be the most graphically pushing thing. Just put it out on everything. But yet again, at the end of the day, I think they turned it around. I think the image is more positive. Right now, it's negative because of Luke. I think that really hurt. And that presentation, how phony it felt, that hurt. But overall, I think if you asked a week ago, you would say, hey, they turned it around. And I don't think the disappointing character and presentation will, stifle that. Given, I think Capcom's fighting game department is struggling. Capcom has had an amazing turnaround since 2017 with the Resident Evil 7 and 8, 2 and 3 remake, multiple Monster Hunter games, the release of Devil May Cry 5 and Mega Man 11, their continued support of re-releasing their older titles like the Mega Man games like Zero, and I think it's going pretty well. I don't want the whole company to just be Monster Hunter. Like I'm sorry to any Monster Hunter fans, but like it needs to be more than just Monster, like mostly Monster Hunter and some Resident Evil on the side. Like they've also done like the Phoenix Wright games. They continue to keep a broad audience, but the fighting game department in general, there used to be like 3 or 4 big Capcom fighting games like coming out a generation, and maybe that cannibalizes sales, like Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and Marvel versus Capcom, Street Fighter 4 were all stepping on each other's toes along with all the downloads. But I think that's also just because Street Fighter Cross Tekken looked a little bit too much like Street Fighter 4. There wasn't like a visual distinction, and that it wasn't just it wasn't like a spectacular game. I think. And maybe they're thinking that because Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite sold terribly and was a flop. That game deserved a flop. That game felt like just Disney corporate, binded and small roster, hideous graphics. That's a whole nother story that I can go into in another video if you want to see. If you want my thoughts on Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, please leave a comment below. But I think in the next generation, I want to see a strong start for Street Fighter 6. Multiple fighting games from Capcom, 2 or 3, please. Give us even downloads of something, please. And yeah, that's it. I'll say at the end of the day, Street Fighter 5 may not be the best selling fighting game of this generation. I think, at the end of the day, maybe Tekken 7 with its fantastic launch and then post-launch support probably ended up being like the best fighting game in terms of pleasing its fans. I mean, you launch with 36 characters, then you have a bunch of seasons with new and old and guest characters. Like that may have kind of turned it around for Tekken in terms of the game was just great from the start. And, you had fantastic revivals like Samurai Showdown, which I love. That game doesn't get enough love. And Guilty Gear really kind of came into its own and got more attention. However, Street Fighter is always going to be the core of fighting games. It is still the one that all the makers of fighting games look up to and kind of reference, like, this is what I played when I was young. So I think it's always going to be the most important fighting game franchise. So when Street Fighter doesn't feel healthy, in my eyes, my feelers out in the gaming world, I feel like fighting games in general, like something's wrong. I feel like something's sick. It doesn't need to sell the most. They'll never sell the most. But if the community's happy. So if the community's happy and healthy, the FGC in general, to me, feels happy and healthy. Not that it wouldn't survive without Street Fighter, but it is the backbone in a lot of ways. And when Capcom in general, when their fighting game division is happy and healthy, the whole FGC is as well. And I'd love to see that in the upcoming generation. So yeah, that's it. Love Street Fighter 5. Man, was I sad about Luke. Still going to play the game. Can't wait to play as Akira. I'm all in on air combos. And know that regardless, I love all fighting games. I just love the idea of getting on the couch with a buddy and going late into the night, beating the tar out of each other. And that's why I love this genre oh so much. So thank you for listening to me ramble on and on about my thoughts on this. We have plenty more to come on both Capcom and Street Fighter and fighting games. But, this was a hot button issue that I really wanted to discuss with you, my audience. I really want your comments on this. I'll try to respond to them as quickly as I can. But what are your takes on Street Fighter V's development, the FGC in general right now, Guilty Gear Strive, which is still like kind of the new hotness, on Luke, on everything, on the character rollout, and what you want to see in Street Fighter 6. Thank you for watching. My name is Mike, and this has been Chip Damage. Take care of yourselves. Thank you.